Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Today's project is another viewer request and it's from Irma in southern Alberta in Canada. Irma has sent me a photo of a reel that she had seen on Facebook or Instagram, and she wanted to know how to make this craft bag. So I've created a pattern and that's what we're going to be doing today. This is it here. It's a storage box with dividers on the inside. If you take all your bits out, you've got 4 dividers on the inside there. You can use it to store your craft items, pens, pencils, cutlery, and if you wanted to make it twice the height, you can use it to carry wine bottles. So hang around whilst I show you how to make this storage caddy with dividers. Here's what we need for our storage basket. I have 2 pieces for the outer fabric, 2 pieces for the lining, 1 piece of fabric for the handle, and that will be cut in half. It's only going to have a very short handle on there. And then I also have 2 pieces of fabric for the dividers inside the basket. Now all of these pieces have been stabilized as well. For the dividers and for the lining, I've gone and ironed a fusible interfacing to the back of that. Now the product I'm using, it's made out of cotton, but it's got fusible stuff on one side, and it's about a medium weight interfacing. So it gives it a little bit of rigidity without being too much. We also need stabilizer for the outer fabric. Now I would prefer to use Peltex, which is a stiff stabilizer like this, but it's still got enough flexibility in it that you can manipulate it easily. Ideally, you'd want one that's fusible, and the only product I have is non-fusible, and I was just too lazy to quilt the fabric to this piece. So what I've used instead is Decaville. This is a lightweight Decaville, very rigid. It does have a lot of flexibility in it, and that's what I've put onto the back of the outer fabric. I've cut my stabilizer for the outer fabric, my seam allowance, narrower all the way around. I will pop the cutting instructions up in just a moment. So the stabilizer for the outside is completely up to you. This basket is designed to sit nice and rigidly on your countertop and it doesn't flop about. You could also just as easily use some kind of quilter's batting and the thickness would be up to you. We also need a stabilizer for the fabric that we're using for the handle. You'll be folding the raw edges into the center and then folding that in again and stitching down both long edges. I'm a bit lazy or have incredibly good time management skills. I like to use a product called iron-on Vilene or a hemming tape, so you don't actually have to sew. This is a double-sided fusible. It's also known as stitch witchery. So what I like to do is place that on each of the folds, and then I'll just fold the raw edges over, fold that together, and then I'll iron it, and that will actually fuse the fabric to that bit of stabilizer. If you don't have access to that, then you can go ahead and use exactly the same interfacing that we've got on our lining, and you can place that interfacing into the center, fold it in half, and then fold it in half again. We also need a contrast strip of binding. So now that we've got all the material, here are the cutting instructions. Now this is going to make quite a low bag, so if you want to make this taller, say for a wine bottle, then you would add height to the fabric, and you would add the same amount of height to all of the pieces. So the first thing you need to do is fuse all the stabilizers onto your fabric pieces, and then you can set that aside. You also need to fold your handle fabric together and together again, fuse that as well. Once I fuse that together, I'm going to sew down both long edges here. This is the fabric for our dividers, and we're going to fold that in half lengthwise. Bring the right sides together, and we'll do the same for the other one. And what we'll do is take that to the machine using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and we'll stitch right across that long edge. That's all we need to do for these 2 pieces. With our lining fabric and our outer fabric, we need to mark the corners, and our box corners are going to be 4 inches or 10 centimetres. and that will be from the outside edge. You'll do that on both sides, and we can cut that out. Set that one aside. We can grab our outer fabric and we'll place those right sides together, and we'll mark that same 4 inches. And again, we're going to measure that from the outside edge. And we can cut that out as well. Now that we've cut out our corners, with the right sides facing, we're going to sew down this end and this one, and we can sew straight across here as well. I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance throughout the entire project, except when I sew these up. That just needs a very small allowance there. I'm going to turn that through. So 1/4 inch will be fine for that one. So let's take this to the machine. We'll sew the outer fabric, the divider pieces, and the fabric for our handle. Let's start with the handle. Next we'll do the divider pieces. And then we will do the side seams and the bottom seam of the outer fabric. Now here's where I want a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm going to just trace the outline of the stabilizer. Backstitch. Repeat for the other side. And we can do the bottom. Whilst we're at the machine, we'll take our divider fabric and turn this the right way out. And once you've turned this the right way out, you've got the seam right down the bottom there. We're going to top stitch the opposite end. And we'll do the same for the other one and just top stitch the folded edge. Okay, with that done, we might as well stay at the machine, fold this in half, mark a crease in the centre. You can put a pin or clip in the centre if you need to, but you should be able to see the fold. And I'll grab the other one and fold that in half as well. Find the centre of that. And then I'm going to place the two on top of each other. So you can see I've made a little mark in the fabric just here, which is the centre. With the top stitched edges lined up, I'll place both fabric pieces together, line them up evenly all the way along. And we're going to sew from the top down to the bottom, right across the centre. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. And there we have our little dividers. So we can now go and iron that. Alright, so here's what we have at the moment. We've got our handle done. We can fold that in half and cut that into 2. Our dividers are finished. So this is how that's going to look inside our bag or basket. And the outer fabric, we have that sewn up on the sides. What we can do now is open it out and bring this seam in line with this seam underneath, and It's up to you whether you want to push your seams to opposite sides or whether you want to press your seams open. I prefer to have them in opposing directions, so I'll have one seam going to my left, the other going to my right. They've locked in place on the seam line, and I'll pop a clip in there to hold that together, and that's nice and straight across there. We'll repeat that for the other side, and we'll do the same with the seam. We'll match it up right across the centre there, and where this seam is now going over to my left, I'm going to carry that across, and the one on this side will go to my right. That will distribute the bulk evenly and help it all lock into place. So you can see we're starting to form the shape of our box here, and you can see how rigid this is as well. Now with our handles, we're going to place those on the side where the seams are, and they're only going to be a very short handle. So what I will do is, again with my seam going in the same direction, so I'm going to keep that going that way, I'll just clip that in place, and I'm going to place my handle on either side of the seam. So I don't need to measure anything, I'll just pop it on each side of that seam allowance, keeping it nice and straight. If you were making this as a wine bottle bag and you made it a lot taller, you'd want to have longer handles, and you'd separate the distance between the ends as well. Repeat for the other side. So again, we'll follow that seam across, pop the handle on, and we can stitch that in place as well. So we'll go back to the machine, we'll sew that, and we'll do our box corners. Once again, we have a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Where the sides meet, I'll reinforce that by triple stitching. And continue on to the end. And then we can stitch our handles onto the side. I'll just stitch that on with a very narrow seam. Okay, we've got our box corners done and our handle in place. If you like, you can turn this the right way out and have a look at it. So there's the finished size of our little boxed storage container with little handles on the side there. Let's set that aside, grab our lining fabric, and we're going to fold this in half and set that aside. We'll do the same for this one, and we're going to take this to the iron and press that really well, because we just want to mark a crease for the time being. Both my pieces have been pressed, and I've got a really nice crease in the centre there, and I've also just marked it with a pen just to make it easier to find if you're having trouble. Okay, so we've got a really nice crease across the centre. Take one of your lining pieces and your divider piece, and what we're going to do is take one of the dividers and we're going to place that along the side seam, And from the bottom edge here, we're going to measure up 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres just along here. We'll do the same on this side as well. We might as well make our markings now. And across the centre where our crease is, we're also going to mark 1 inch from this edge here. So if you just take a ruler, line up that 1 inch with the bottom edge of your box corner and make a mark across there. We'll do that for the other one as well. Small mark there. And on the outside edges. With one side of your divider, we're going to place that on the side edge of your lining, and we're going to position that at that 1 inch mark. With that clipped in place, take your other lining piece and place that right side together, and we'll line that up along the side, and that's ready to be stitched in place. But before we do that, we're going to attach all 4 ends of our dividers. Open this right out. So over here we have our side seam, and we have another side seam over here. With these two out of the way, this one here is extending along, and we're going to take this one and place it on the folded edge of the fabric. So keep these two out of the way. And that doesn't matter that we've got a raw edge along here, because we've created this crease for a reason. So we're going to fold that across, make sure that's tucked in nice and firmly. We'll clip that in place, and we'll also sew across here. Then you'll take the next loose flap and place that onto the other side of your lining. And before we sew this together, we'll have a look and see how it all looks so that you know that you've got the right pieces in the right order. So we've got that clipped together. Before we put the other end of the lining on here, we're going to secure this flap to the other fold. So bring this one over, place that down over the fold, fold that over. We can secure that in place, and then all we have left is the other side seam, which will get attached to here. Okay, so if we have a look at this upside down, there's all the dividers in place. This is how it's going to look. You will sew a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance on both folded edges, and you'll also do that on these side edges. Did you want me to show you how to do that again? I think I will. It'll go much quicker this time. Okay, so we've got the top stitched edge of our divider, which will be facing the top of our basket. Take one divider piece, position that 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the bottom. Take the other lining piece with right sides together, place it over the top and secure it in place. Fold that open, separate the other divider pieces. Take this divider piece, the one that's connected to the one that's already fixed into the side, place it on the fold of your lining, secure that, open that out again, take the next divider piece, secure that to your side seam, take the next divider piece, and open that lining, and we're going to place that on the fold of the lining. And all the time we're lining this up with those marks that we've made. Once that one's done, we can take the side seam here and meet that up with the other side seam. double check it, and now we can go and sew it up. I'll start with the side seam and we'll close up all of those layers. Remember, it's a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning. Where the bulk is from the divider here, I'll go forward, back and forward at the top and bottom to reinforce all that. Find the other side seam and we'll repeat. And now we can find the folds, and we're going to start from the top and stitch all the way to the bottom. This creates a false seam. It saves us having to cut the fabric in half and gives us a neater finish. And find the other fold and repeat. Okay, so that's our dividers in place. Let's box the corners and close up the bottom seam. So where you've got the folded edge here stitched up, open that out, and the other one on the opposite side. Spread that apart, and we'll line up these centre folds. And just like we did with our raw edged seams, we're going to have them going in opposing directions. So I'll have one going to my left, one going to my right. That distributes the bulk evenly, and it also means that they're locked in, so if I wiggle that, it sits nice and firmly together. Line up the outer edges. And we'll sew that in place. Once you've done that, we'll stay at the machine, and just like we did on the outer fabric, we're going to spread this out, and we're going to have one seam going in one direction, the other going in the other opposite direction. Line all of that up and sew across here and across here. We'll do that at the machine though. So first of all, we're going to stitch the bottom, back stitch here. Once again, I will reinforce the stitching on that folded edge. With the bottom finished, we can now take the side seam and the bottom edge and bring those seams together. My side seam I'm going to face to my left, and the bottom seam I'll point to my right. So that's all been secured in place, and all I need to do is sew straight across. Once I've done that, I'll do the same for the other side. Alright, with this completely finished now, all we need to do is put the lining inside the outer fabric. So you want to make sure at this stage you've got your outer fabric the right way out, because there's only one way to put this together now. So take the edge that's got the actual raw seam, not the false seam, and we're going to line that up with the raw seams that we've got on the inside here. Pop that inside and line up your side seams, and then line up everything else and clip it together all the way around. And once you're happy with that, we're going to take this to the machine and sew all the way around where the end of the stabilizer is. So if we have a look on the inside, you can see the stabilizer on the inside of the fabric there. That's our 1 centimetre seam overhanging, and that's what we'll be doing when we close it up. We'll be sewing right on the very edge of that stabilizer, and that's going to leave our edges raw, which is what we want. Now I don't really have much choice but to sew it with the inside facing up, unless you have a free arm on your machine, and then you can sew with the outside facing up. I'm starting on the side seam, All right, that's been stitched together, and I've done this just so that it's easier for us to put the binding on. If you're really confident, you can go and sew the binding on at the same time that you actually sew this edge on, but I did find it much easier to do this step first. Now what we need to do is measure all the way around here. If you start from the side seam and try and be as accurate as you can, come all the way around, back to the beginning, measure back to that side seam, and I have got 83 centimetres or 32 3/4 inches. I need to add a seam allowance to that, and my seam allowance is 1 centimetre. So my binding strip needs to be 85 centimetres long or 33.5 inches, and that is 4 centimetres in width or 1.5 inches. So let's cut this to the length we need, and then what we're going to do is bring the short ends together and with a 1 centimetre seam allowance sew across there. I'll go and do that now. So we've made a tube of our fabric, press the seam open, and it's better to have this fitting snugly around your box than too loose. Let's start with the seam here and line that up on the seam line of the handle. We're going to pin this to the outside fabric. So bring that around so that it sits right around your box. And that looks to be fitting nice and snugly. So I can clip that all together, and then we're going to take it back to the machine and sew in exactly the same place. So we just want to secure this band to the fabric that we've sewn together already. Let's go do that. Okay, so here we go again. I'm going to follow the stitching line that I've already done when putting the two layers together. So the band has been sewn on all the way around. I've made a sample piece just to show you how things are looking at the moment. So what we have is the lining, and we have the outer fabric. So we've got our lining here and the outer fabric here, and on the outside of that we've got that band. So what we want to do is take the band fabric, fold this fabric up to the edge of your stitching line. So on here we'll take the raw edge and fold that up to the stitching line, and you can finger press that all the way around. And once you've done that, we're going to fold all this fabric, including the stitching line, because remember we've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance here. So bring the fabric all the way around, and you want the outside fabric to be sitting on its own, and this band with the folded edge, flip that right over, and there's going to be your band on the inside of your pouch like this, and all you'll have is a nice neat seam right around the top. Let's do that on here. Grab the raw edge of your fabric, fold that up to the stitching line, put a crease in the fabric to help it sit nicely, and you want to do that all the way around. And once you've done that all the way around and you finger press that crease, you can fold the fabric including these raw edges. So bring the folded edge up, bring the raw edges down, and continue bringing that folded edge around to the other side. That's going to sit on the inside of the fabric, and it'll give us a nice crisp edge along the top. With the handle, continue doing exactly the same. You'll just fold that fabric over. That will bring your handle up. So that's how it's going to look on the inside. You've got that raw edge here, fold it up to the stitching line, fold it up again, and fold it over on that stitching line. And clip it all the way around. And once you've done that, we're going to do 2 rows of top stitching around this band. So the first row of top stitching we're going to do is along the bottom edge of the band. That will secure it in place all the way around. Then we'll do another row of top stitching along the top edge of the band. That'll just reduce some of that bulk around the top edge. And start sewing wherever it feels comfortable. Have you noticed in my videos I very rarely do bindings? I'd much rather have something fully lined and then top stitch. There's a couple of reasons for me not doing bindings. One is that I just don't like them, and the second is that I just don't do a good enough job. I always have pleats or creases in them, and I find for having products to sell, it doesn't look very professional. So that's why you don't see me doing bindings very often. I guess if I did them more often, I might get better at it, but I just don't like them. Now that that row's been fixed in place, we can top stitch the upper section. So if, like me, you can't get your bindings to look very nice, then use something with a colour in it. I've used the spotted one so you can't notice the ripples as much. A fabric with a marble or a really busy print will also be good for it. But stay away from the plain fabric if you don't want those flaws to be seen. And there we have our finished storage container. I can even fit my little basket of clips and another little container here. Put your scissors, tools, pens, pencils, anything you like in there. And with that little carry handle, it's perfect to take it around wherever you need to. Now that's not all you can do. You can leave your bag exactly as it is now, but it kind of has a bit of a curved edge around it. So I think I'd like to have nice sharp corners. For that, I like to use skewers. So pop the skewer in right on the corner, down to this corner here, and then fold the fabric over the skewer, keeping that in place at the bottom. We can clip those edges together and then remove the skewer. So we didn't want to stitch that with it in place. What this skewer does is that it actually forces the fabric to sit in the corner, and that way when you top stitch, you're actually going to catch all the folds. If you just run your finger down here, fold it across and stitch, you may not catch all the layers of the lining as you go. So I like to use just some bamboo or metal skewers and then pull that out. So you could also use the flat edge of your ruler, put that into the corner, and that forces the fabric to go right into the corner there, and then you can remove that ruler. I find the skewers are easier to use though, because the clips clip right around the curve in the skewer. I'll go and top stitch those corners now. The top stitching really just wants to be as narrow as you can get it. I'm starting at the top edge. And I'll finish just before I get to the corner. And repeat for the other sides. So once you've done those corners, that's going to sit up much more firmly than it did before, and you'll have nice square corners rather than the curved edges. You could even make a picnic version of this and put different cutlery items in here, knife, fork, spoon, and some napkins perhaps. So how was that? A multi-use storage caddy with dividers. I've gone and put my plastic snaps in here. My rotary cutters are in one side and some other bits and pieces in the other dividers. So a perfect little storage caddy that you can carry around with you. You can easily put this into the car and out of the car again when you're going to your craft group, even to separate your knitting or crochet balls of wool as well. Thanks, Irma, for the request for this. I hope it's what you wanted. I hope you've all enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.